Hey, economic warriors. It's your boy, the boss of Boss Economics World, here to break down the juiciest, most wallet-busting economic drama on the planet. We're diving headfirst into the trade deal circus, Trump style, where tariffs are the trapeze, negotiators are the clowns, and the global economy is the audience holding its breath. So, grab your popcorn, your spreadsheets, and maybe a stress ball, because today we're unpacking the U.S. Japan trade love fest, the EU's tariff tantrum, and China's Stockholm showdown. Let's get this economic party started. Oh, folks, let's start with the star of the show, the U.S. Japan trade deal, hailed by Trump's top trade honchos, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, as the gold standard of modern trade negotiations. Japan, facing the barrel of a 25% tariff gun, blinked first and agreed to a 15% duty on its exports, including its precious cars, which make up a whopping 80% of its trade surplus with the U.S. But here's the kicker, they're also coughing up a $550 billion fund to invest in American projects. Equity, loans, loan guarantees, you name it, Japan's writing the checks. Lutnick's out here calling it innovative financing, but let's call it what it is, a diplomatic bribe to keep Trump from going full tariff terminator. Now, let's zoom out and look at the economic absurdity here. Japan's essentially saying, fine, we'll pay you to not hate us. And the US is like, sweet, we'll take your money and still sell you overpriced soybeans. But here's the deeper issue, folks, this deal exposes the cracks in the global trade system. Japan's markets are notoriously closed, think of their agricultural sector, which is guarded like a samurai fortress. According to the World Bank, Japan's average applied tariff rate on agricultural products is 15.7%, compared to just 5.2% for industrial goods. So, instead of cracking open those markets, the US settled for a cash infusion. Is this a win for American workers, or just a shiny distraction from the real problem, unbalanced trade? And let's talk numbers, because numbers don't lie, unlike some negotiators. The U.S. trade deficit with Japan was $67.6 billion in 2023, per the U.S. Census Bureau. Cars and car parts. A cool $47 billion of that. So, yeah, Japan's auto industry is basically the Godzilla of trade imbalances. This $550 billion fund might sound like a jackpot, but spread it over years, and it's a drop in the bucket compared to the structural issues. Plus, as Lutnick admitted, this money isn't even earmarked for Japanese companies, it's for generic U.S. projects like semiconductor plants and critical minerals. Translation, Japan's paying for America's industrial policy. Genius for the U.S., maybe, but for Japan? It's like paying your bully to stop stealing your lunch money. Now, let's pivot to the EU, where the drama is spicier than a German sausage festival. The U.S. is pushing for a deal similar to Japan's, 15% duties, acceptance of U.S. vehicle standards, and more American exports. But the EU, with its 27 member states, is like a dysfunctional family trying to agree on pizza toppings. Treasury Secretary Bessent nailed it when he said the EU has a collective action problem. Translation, too many cooks in the kitchen, and half of them are arguing over whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Here's the economic elephant in the room, the EU's trade surplus with the US was $208 billion in 2023, according to Eurostat. That's triple Japan's. And guess what? The EU knows that any tariff escalation hurts them more. Bessent's out here smirking, saying, escalation will always hit them worse. And he's not wrong. The EU's economy is already wobbling. Germany, the bloc's economic engine, saw its GDP shrink by 0.1% in Q2 2024, per the status. Meanwhile, the US economy grew by 2.8% annualized in the same period, per the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So, yeah, the EU's got less wiggle room than a sardine in a can. But wait, there's more. The EU's reportedly prepping retaliatory tariffs of 30% on €100 billion, $117 billion, of US goods. Bessent calls it a negotiating tactic, and he's probably right. But let's not kid ourselves, this is economic brinkmanship. If the EU follows through, we're talking higher prices for American consumers on everything from French wine to Italian leather. And don't forget, the US isn't exactly innocent here. Remember the Boeing Airbus subsidy spat? The US slapped tariffs on $7.5 billion of EU goods, and the EU hit back with $4 billion of US products. It's like a transatlantic tariff tit for tat, and the only winners are the lawyers and lobbyists. So, what's the deeper economic issue? It's the same old story, protectionism versus free trade. The US wants the EU to buy more American stuff, but the EU's internal market is a fortress. Take cars, for example. The EU's vehicle standards are notoriously strict. Think emissions rules that make US manufacturers cry into their tailpipes. Harmonizing those standards could save US automakers billions, but it's a political non-starter in Europe, where green policies are sacred. And let's not forget the EU's agricultural market, which is even more protected than Japan's. The Common Agricultural Policy, CAP, eats up 33% of the EU budget, Euro 55 billion in 2023, per the European Commission. Good luck getting American farmers into that club. Oh, and then there's China, folks, the economic dragon that just won't quit. The next round of talks is set for July 28, 29, 2025, in Stockholm, and the stakes are higher than a Shanghai skyscraper. The US is pushing China on everything from buying sanctioned Russian and Iranian oil to agricultural purchases to cybersecurity breaches. Remember that Microsoft hack in 2024, allegedly by Chinese state-sponsored hackers? Yeah, that's on the table. And don't forget those exit bans on US executives, straight out of a spy thriller. But here's the economic meat of the matter, the US-China trade war is cooling, at least for now. The latest tariff truce expires August 12, 2025, but Besant's hinting at a 90-day extension. Why? Because both sides are exhausted. The U.S. trade deficit with China was $279 billion in 2023, per the U.S. Census Bureau, but tariffs haven't fixed that, they've just made iPhones more expensive. Meanwhile, China's economy is slowing, GDP growth was just 4.7% in Q2 2024, per the National Bureau of Statistics, missing forecasts. They can't afford a full-blown trade war any more than the U.S. can. But let's zoom out, because this isn't just about tariffs, it's about geopolitics. China's purchases of Russian and Iranian oil. That's not just an economic issue, it's a security one. The US is worried about China propping up rogue regimes, but here's the irony, US sanctions have pushed those countries into China's arms. And don't forget agriculture. China's promised to buy more US farm goods, but the numbers are shaky. In 2023, US agricultural exports to China were $40.9 billion, per the USDA, but that's still below the pre-trade war peak. Farmers are hurting, and Trump's base isn't happy. Alright, folks, let's step back and look at the forest, not just the trees. What do these trade deals, tariff threats, and investment funds tell us? We're living in the era of economic nationalism on steroids. Trump's team isn't playing by the old free trade playbook, they're rewriting the rules with a Sharpie. Japan's deal. It's not about opening markets, it's about extracting cash. The EU talks. It's not about fair trade, it's about flexing muscle. And China? It's not just about trade deficits, it's about global dominance. But here's the economic problem, folks, this approach is a sugar high, not a long-term fix. Tariffs and investment funds might juice GDP in the short term, but they don't solve structural issues like trade imbalances, closed markets, or supply chain vulnerabilities. The US manufacturing sector, for example, is still shrinking, industrial production fell 0.6% in June 2024, per the Federal Reserve. And consumers? They're paying the price. A 2023 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods cost American consumers $40 billion annually in higher prices. So, what's the endgame, economic warriors? For Japan, expect more deals like this, cash for peace. For the EU, brace for a tariff showdown, because Trump loves a good fight. And for China, watch Stockholm closely, because if those talks collapse, we're back to tariff Armageddon. But here's my advice to you, the savvy viewer, don't just watch the headlines, watch your wallet. Because in this economic circus, the clowns might be in charge, but you're the one paying for the tickets. That's all for today, folks. Smash that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, is Trump's trade strategy genius or madness? Until next time, keep hustling, keep investing, and keep being the boss of your own economics world.